All right, Miss Tammy G, you were so great to let me do this observation for my class. Okay, so the pre-observation form that we filled out, you were doing RL3, which is analyzing character interactions. It's also about the plot diagram, and so you were doing a passage that I've read too. There Will Be Soft Rains by Ray Bradbury. So it's literature. It's this fourth 9th week pacing guide that we're reteaching. And we go through and we talk about that you're doing the assessment of the plot worksheet. And then we talked about that one of the things that is difficult for this age group is figuring out that suspenseful moment, that climax moment, and they all struggle. They want to confuse it with the conflict. So, all right, so we're going to get into this. Just did Domain 3. That's all we had to do.
Okay.
So on Domain 3 with communicating with students, okay, I have you rated exemplary, and I'm going to tell you, you're 26-year veteran teacher. How many years?
22.
Yeah, 22 years, and boy, does it show. You are awesome.
Thank you.
And so on this 3A, communicating with students, I just have that your learning target was on the board. You have that it describes the drama events and character interaction, and you discuss the target with your students at the beginning of that lesson, and you even reviewed what you had done the day before to remind them of what had happened, since we all, sleep in the, in between. And then you talked about the elements of that plot diagram that you guys had discussed the day before too. So you really set them up. You had them ready. Okay.
Okay.
And please comment, stop me at any time. The second one is using questioning and discussion techniques. And I love seeing how you used free groups in with a formative assessment. And that led into your summative. But you began the lesson by asking students to find a keyword to help identify the climax of that story. And boy, as a teacher of the same content area, that went off like a light bulb for me.
Well, this worked well, I think, because it's a difficult concept for them to understand with climax. Letting them work together in groups and bounce ideas off one another, and then coming back together as a whole group to finish out, I think that helped them to try to focus their ideas more than just if I'm sitting there by myself and I can't think of anything. So I think, and I actually continue to do that in my other 2 classes because that worked so well.
Oh, it works so well, and I've kind of put it in my pocket for me to use next year too, because it's such a struggle. The students worked in the free groups together, and what I loved is you explained the discussion technique that everybody needed to be able to have input, and you walked around that room very quietly but listening, and you stopped your group and said, oh, and you were very quiet. I don't even think the rest of anybody heard you, and said, are y'all just letting her talk, or is everybody getting a chance to discuss? And you kind of discussed, she needs to go, and then you can add to this, and then that group did that. You modeled that for them real quick, kind of got them back on target so they weren't just listening to the one person.
And the one engaging them and making sure that they were completing this task. There was one as I walked around, and we might get to this in assessment, but there was one group that I had to redirect because they didn't really identify the correct climax, so we had to go back and say, think about that again. But out of 30 kids, and only 2 weren't on track, I thought they did fairly well.
Oh, I thought that was great. So in the questioning and the discussion techniques, I thought it was great that went through, and the free group thing was great with the discussion, and so that I have also marked exemplary. In Domain 3C, engaging the students in the learning, they were immediately engaged. I love how you even have your learning target. I think you had your RL3 on their paper that day, and I loved that on that plot diagram. They were ready to listen. It was timed perfectly, so you gave directions. They got started. 2 or 3 minutes in that group, and you switched into an independent activity. And the way everything rolled, they have the perfect amount of time to get that done before that bell rang.
And that was kind of amazing because that was the first reading class, because a lot of times as I teach, I adjust. But at this lesson, I didn't have to really adjust because the timing worked out perfectly for each activity that they were doing.
I mean, it did. It really did. It was great. And I just have that in engaging the students, that key word, it was like their lifesaver if they were floating in the ocean. You know what, folks? We're going to find that key word. And when we find that key word, that's going to clue you into what that climax was. And it did. And you had those couple of people that didn't really find it, and you got everybody to say, okay, what's the key word? And they said fire, and then you worked backwards with that group.
Yes.
And they had to figure that out, and then it was like magic with that climax. They really had that moment. And so that was really cool. So E and that, and I'm not just saying E. I mean, Tammy, it was fun to be in here and watch because all that method, the strategies of teaching were very apparent. In Domain 3, we have the using the assessment. I just had that you had a roadmap for successful completion of assessment. I mean, you start with that formative first. And one of the things that a very influential person once said to me, when you do the formative, you know if you can do the summative because it tells you. And you did. You knew they were ready. You probably knew they were ready the day before, but you did a formative to make sure.
Yes.
And you had that group to kind of, discuss and talk with. And that's what I have for my evidence here, is that you had to back up a little bit.
Yes.
And check with them. And then once they did that, they were just ready. How were the grades on that assessment when you got it back?
So I did grade for complete correctness from exactly what I was looking for along the plot diagram, and the average was about an 87. So I feel like that they have mastered that content.
Yes.
Matter of fact, they worked on the next assignment. I think it was the following day or the day after, where they worked completely independent and did the same assessment. So.
And I love that too, because we have groups who have a little support, and then we work until we do that individually. Absolutely. So on the assessment instruction, exemplary, on the demonstrating flexibility, this domain talks about having to make changes when we're up there in front of our class. And while you didn't really have to necessarily change your lesson, you were very flexible as to what was happening with our students. And so, like we talked about, that you had to stop and talk to the one group about the discussion. And then you had to stop and you noticed that group was struggling and didn't really have the right climax, didn't have the keyword. And so you kind of worked back through that with them. And you didn't give them the answer.
Right.
I mean, they had to figure out why that clue led to that keyword, and then they found out what was going on with the climax. And so I just felt like that you used those opportunities of misunderstanding to make the picture clearer for them.
Yes.
And that's what made it successful. So you're happy with what
that
happened.
And that was a lesson that I have not used before. And just a different kind of way to present the lesson. I've always taught plot, but I like it so much I'll use it again next year.
Yeah, and I do too. And I even, that story is a difficult passage by Ray Bradbury, but I think using that technique makes that, it's a good thing to do. It's a good tool to do because we're going to see difficult passage like that. And so that's good.
And it breaks it down, I think, more individually each step, so that students can, if you look at the worksheet and the Freytag's pyramid, each step of Freytag's pyramid is broken down for them as to what they're looking for in each step. So I think that's helpful. That's something that they were able to really look at and pull from the text.
I think so too. And then one of the other things about the flexibility is that you even said, once they found that climax, and it's so funny, some kids went left and did exposition, rising action. Some kids went falling action and did resolution. And you said, you know what, that's fine.
Right.
Because you're going to get it all done. However you started is really okay. And I don't know, your class seemed very relaxed, very engaged. I didn't notice that you had any behaviors. I just felt like it was great.
Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. Did you have anything that you would have changed or anything you would have done different? I mean, I think we've talked about how successful it was.
I don't think there's anything, if I did have the chance to go back and teach that lesson again, just reflecting back, I don't think because it went so well, and this is not very often, but I don't think I'd change very much about it at all.
I really loved it.
As a matter of fact, when I am teaching, if I see something that needs to change, from one class to another, I do change it, but for some reason, this lesson just went so well. This is one of the few times that I had to just leave it. I left it as it was. Because they were engaged and it worked. Yep, I think so too. So I think it was a great lesson. I think they definitely showed, just like you said, you have the proof of the 87% as an average for everyone. Right.
But it shows the proof that they all understood the material and the content, and they showed that they did. So I think that was great. Awesome. Thanks so much.